Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Today we have another breakdown of Generative Energy Podcast between Danny Roddy and Georgi Dinkov. Now, it's been a little while since I've done this, the last one, but this is going to be a part 2, and we're going to be breaking down Generative Energy Podcast episode number 5. And again, this is going to be part 2, so let's just get right into it because I think there's a lot that we're going to be covering. So today we're going to be unpacking part 2 of generative energy number 5. So this segment zeroes in on why good stress often isn't, how fasting flips from helpful to harmful, why toxins can echo across generations and how that actually could be reversed, what really happens when you move to altitude, and practical ways to tame serotonin-driven stress. So let's break down the first part here. So we start off the conversation with a discussion by challenging the whole idea that stress is always good for you. You've probably heard the term hormesis, that little bits of stress can make the body stronger, like, going to the gym, lifting weights, or taking a cold shower. But what Georgi and Danny are saying here is that modern life doesn't really give us short bursts of stress. It gives us chronic stress. And that's a completely different biological situation. So chronic, unpredictable, mild stress is one of the most fundamental ways to damage and kill an organism. Once you start releasing PUFA, serotonin, nitric oxide, and the COX and LOX enzymes, you've got a vicious cycle and there's no stopping it. So what he's describing here is a biochemical feedback loop. When you're under constant pressure, work, lack of sleep, emotional stress, or even fasting, your body releases stored fat called PUFAs, which are polyunsaturated fats, and these fats are unstable. And when they're freed into the bloodstream, they trigger inflammatory chemicals like serotonin, nitric oxide, and prostaglandins, all of which feed the stress response even more. So instead of stress making you tougher, it makes you inflamed, tired, and metabolically sluggish. So Ray Peat talked a lot about this idea that stress chemistry lowers your energy production, it slows down your thyroid function, and can even lead to depression-like symptoms. This explains why some people feel worse after pushing through too many cold plunges, extreme fasting, or constant high-intensity loads and workouts. They think that they're building resilience, but if their baseline metabolism isn't strong, if their thyroid or liver function is low, then they're just amplifying this stress cycle. So Georgi's main point here is simple. Hormesis is only beneficial if your body can recover afterwards. Without recovery and enough energy, meaning good nutrition, thyroid function, and the rest, stress becomes toxic instead of strengthening. All right, so now we're ready to move on to the next section of the podcast. And what they're talking about here next is fasting. So Georgi gives a nuanced take that's pretty different from what most of the internet says about autophagy. We've all heard the phrase fasting activates autophagy and cleans out bad cells in your body. But Georgi points out that this is only telling half the story and that the benefit has a short shelf life. So he says, after about 48 hours of fasting, you're starting to damage yourself. Once your temperature drops, autophagy turns from cleaning to inflammation. So in plain terms, autophagy is the process where your body breaks down old and damaged cells to recycle them. It sounds great, but like any repair process, it needs energy. When you fast for too long, your body starts running out of fuel. At that point, instead of recycling cells, it starts breaking down healthy tissue to survive. That shift is what Georgi means when he says you're starting to damage yourself. He also ties this to temperature, because as your metabolism slows, your body temperature drops, and low temperature is a red flag for reduced thyroid function, which makes the whole system less efficient. Ray Peat used to say that autophagy isn't inherently good or bad. It depends on whether your body has enough energy to rebuild afterwards. So people feel good early on when they start the fasting. They're clearing endotoxin, which is most likely what's happening. Adrenaline goes up, but if you stay there for too long, the free fatty acids rise serotonin rises, and then you crash. This early feel-good phase of fasting comes from adrenaline and endotoxin clearance. You're running on stress chemistry, but after a couple of days, free fatty acid floods the system, it floods the bloodstream, and serotonin spikes and inflammation sets in. That's why Georgi says it's a better approach to mimic fasting without actually starving. He mentions tools like niacinamide, aspirin, vitamin E, and methylene blue, all of which help lower lipolysis, meaning they prevent your body from dumping those unstable fats into your system. So if you're fasting and you feel cold, anxious, or sluggish, that's not your body detoxing, that's the stress phase. The real recovery happens when you reintroduce foods, especially carbs, to restore energy metabolism and bring your body temperature back up. The main message here is that fasting isn't magic. It works briefly because it reduces the digestive burden and endotoxin without fuel. Your stress hormones take over. Georgi's practical takeaway, and Ray Pete's too, is that energy supports repair better than deprivation. Okay, on to the next section. We're going to be talking about environmental toxins like BPA, radiation, and GMO exposure. They can actually echo across generations. It's the idea that what our parents and grandparents were exposed to might still influence our metabolism and health today. But Georgi makes an important point. Those inherited effects aren't permanent. The change in environment is also inherited. Even a single generation living in a better environment can interrupt this vicious cycle. What he's describing is called epigenetic inheritance. So how stress, toxins, or poor nutrition can alter gene expression without changing the DNA sequence itself. For example, exposure to BPA or radiation can turn off protective metabolic genes and pass that pattern to the next generation. But those changes are malleable. If you improve the environment, better diet, sunlight, sleep, and energy metabolism, those epigenetic marks can actually fade away. So Ray Pete talked about this idea too a lot. So he said that the metabolism itself is a form of information. A stressed organism teaches the next generation how to survive under stress by lowering its metabolic rate, but a well-nourished one passes on the opposite signal that the world is safe and energy is actually abundant. So even the grandchildren of mice exposed to toxins show changes in behavior and fertility, but when the environment improves, those traits actually reversed. So that means that the future isn't genetically locked in. If you change the metabolic signal, less PUFA, less stress, more thyroid support and energy, your kids and grandkids inherit that state of abundance instead of scarcity. So the takeaway here from this part is actually hopeful. So yes, toxins and stress can echo across generations, but metabolism environment can echo too. So energy and nutrition aren't just about feeling better today. They're literally the way you re-educate your genes for the next generation. Just want to say, if you're enjoying or finding this content helpful, just leave a like down below. It's been a little while since I've done these, but then I logged back into the account and then I realized there was actually a few comments. So kind of got interested again to get back into this. I just had been like pretty busy this past summer and didn't have time to like really get onto this, but here we are back again. So next section, we're going to be talking about how living at high altitude affects metabolism and longevity. So a lot of people know that altitude increases red blood cell count, but Georgi explains that the real benefit might actually come from something else entirely. It's higher carbon dioxide and better oxygen efficiency. So Georgi says at altitude, you're not getting more oxygen, you're getting less, but the body adapts by retaining more CO2, and that's what protects energy metabolism. So here's what he means. At higher elevations, there's actually less oxygen in the air, and your body compensates by increasing breathing rate and the red blood cell production. But over time, you start producing more CO2 as well. And in Ray Pete's view, CO2 isn't just a waste product, it's an essential part of metabolism. It keeps blood vessels relaxed, improves oxygen delivery to tissues, and stabilizes the nervous system. Ray Peat often said that carbon dioxide is what allows oxygen to actually get into the cell. Without it, oxygen just sits in the blood and can't actually be used efficiently. This is known as the Bohr effect. So when Georgi talks about altitude being protective, he's pointing to the CO2-driven efficiency. It's like upgrading your body's oxygen economy. So Danny says, sort of paraphrase, something kind of like, so that's why people who live at high altitude like Peru or parts of Mexico often show lower rates of heart disease and diabetes. Now, Georgi also cautions that not everyone adapts easily. For people with low thyroid or weak metabolisms, the reduced oxygen can initially feel stressful. So you get headaches, fatigue, or poor sleep. So it's not automatically healthy unless your metabolism is strong enough to handle it. But for most people, mild exposure, even a short trips or sleeping in slightly hypoxic conditions can trigger beneficial adaptations. So the bottom line is that altitude teaches your body to use oxygen more efficiently by raising CO2 and stabilizing metabolism. But like all forms of stress, it only works if you recover well. Once again, Georgi's message is consistent. The benefit isn't in the stress itself, but in your body's energy-backed adaptation to it. Okay, we're now in our last section, and what we're going to be talking about here is about serotonin. So Georgi dives into something Ray Peat talked about for decades. It's serotonin. Most people still think that it's the happiness chemical, but Georgi flips that idea completely on its head. He says serotonin is actually a stress signal, something your body produces when energy metabolism slows down, especially in your gut. So Georgi said something like, serotonin rises when thyroid and carbon dioxide fall. It's not a happiness molecule, it's a brake on metabolism. So when your thyroid is low, you're producing less CO2 and holding on to less sodium, both of which are needed to deactivate serotonin. That's why low thyroid, gut irritation, or fasting can all make serotonin build up. It's not just in your brain either. Most of your serotonin is actually made in your intestines, and when it's chronically high, it causes inflammation, slows digestion, increases cortisol, and can even affect skin and hair health by tightening blood vessels and reducing oxygen flow. So Danny said something kind of like, so too much serotonin can basically make you cold, anxious, and inflamed, the opposite of what people expect. So the goal isn't to eliminate serotonin. Your body needs some for normal gut motility and vascular tone, but to manage it so that it doesn't dominate. So Georgi suggests balancing it through energy metabolism rather than harsh suppression. That means you want to support your thyroid function, getting enough carbs and salt, using supplements like niacinamide, aspirin, or B1 to lower stress metabolism. In some cases, he mentioned cyproheptadine as a pharmaceutical serotonin antagonist. I think that's a antihistamine, but that generally is for therapeutic use under medical supervision. So think about symptoms like poor sleep, cold hands, low libido, or hair shedding. All of those can be linked back to elevated serotonin and stress chemistry. When metabolism is restored, when the cells are actually producing energy efficiently, serotonin naturally drops and those issues start to resolve. So the key message here is that serotonin isn't your friend when it's elevated chronically. Instead, it's chasing more of it through supplements or lifestyle trends. Focus on improving metabolism. So get enough carbs, thyroid, make sure your CO2 is good enough, high enough CO2, and as well as salt or sodium. The more your body produces energy, the less serotonin it needs to rely on a stress signal. Okay, so that concludes part 2 here of breakdown of generative energy number 5. There's going to be at least another part, which leave me some words of encouragement down below so I could get to that quicker, just so I know that's something you guys are interested in. So far, it seems like the response is pretty cool, so that's awesome. And I just want to say thanks for stopping by again. Drop a like and leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll try my best to get back to you if I don't know an answer. Maybe somebody else that's watching might know. All right, thanks. Talk to you and see you in the next one.